Nothing could go on in the Vatican regarding money until the day after Pope Benedict announced his resignation. Now, I'm sorry, that's just not coincidence.
My friends, welcome to the John Henry Weston Show. It's very interesting today because today we are following up on the heels of some very controversial things going on. You will have seen the show with Steve Bannon that Liz Yore and myself were on, where we talked about what's going on in the Vatican right now with the health of Pope Francis being in question, but then also, what is this? Vigano just called for a look into U.S. government pressures on Pope Benedict to resign, as he did back in 2013, upsetting the whole Catholic world, putting us into a tailspin like the Church has never experienced before in its 2,000-year history. We've got with us today, in addition to Liz Yore, David Saunier, a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Army who was in special ops as well, and he was privy to regime change that the U.S. government was involved in. And did that happen with the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI? That would be stunning, because then, by canon law and the rules set out by John Paul II on the election of the Roman pontiff and resignations, the resignation would then be invalid, which would then invalidate the papacy of Pope Francis. So heady stuff to deal with, and an expert. And please God, we hear of the U.S. government releasing those records, which we're calling for in a petition that you can get to at lifepetitions.com. Liz Yore, David Saunier, so good to be with you both.
Great to be with you.
Good to be with you.
Let's begin, as we always do, with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
Liz, tell us what's going on.
Well, John Henry, back in 2017, shortly after the election of Donald Trump, the first election, it became clear in the intervening years since the abdication of Pope Benedict and the unrolling of the papacy of Francis that some very strange things were going on. We learned that Ted McCarrick was deeply involved in the China deal. In fact, Ted McCarrick, the global sexual predator, probably the most prominent churchman in America, if not the world, had been involved in the election of Pope Francis. He admittedly said that he had been consulted and was, quote unquote, talking him up. So the opportunity finally arrived for us as laymen to reach out to the new president in 2017 and his administration, asking him to investigate the deep state collusion, which we believe between what Archbishop Vigano has called the deep church, specifically in the deep state, the role that the Obama-Biden administration played to effectuate this 1-2 punch, as all coups have, abdicating, forcing the resignation of Benedict and the installation of Bergoglio. That letter, unfortunately, was never acted upon, nor did we really get a response. Our guest today was one of the original signatories, along with me. But over the last 4, then 8 years, we've learned a great deal of information regarding what was going on behind the scenes with Ted McCarrick. He's now been laicized. We've learned a great deal about the role of the American government in color revolutions. And interestingly enough, both David and I kind of came to the same conclusion without originally talking to each other, that now was the perfect time to reissue this letter to President Trump. He knows he's been at the end of the persecution of the deep state. His administration, which is only, 3 weeks old, has been receiving enormous pressure, criticism from Pope Francis, from the bishops, over what many of us consider in the Catholic Church as a sane policy to build a wall, protect our borders and our sovereignty, and deport illegal aliens. So David reached out to me at a time I had originally in November suggested that we reissue the letter with the new administration. David and I both feel very strongly that this letter should be reissued now to a even wiser Donald Trump, and who is well aware of the deep state machinations. And so I'm delighted to introduce David. And also at the very same time, what happened, which was not planned, Archbishop Vigano issues an interview in Italy saying that he is calling on Donald Trump's CIA to investigate the very same thing that we're asking. The one, abdication of Pope Benedict, whether or not it was pressured by the American government, the Obama-Biden administration, and two, whether or not there were machinations and plans and strategies to install Jorge Bergoglio. A lot has been breaking in the last few days on this issue. We're going to find more, I'm sure, whistleblowers stepping up. But David has a unique experience and viewpoint, I think, that is very, very valuable. And so we're issuing this letter. Actually, we're going to call it a global letter because we know that Catholics around the world want an answer to these questions. So, David, you have the floor.
I think that last point that you just made is the most important point. When you say it wasn't received, well, it wasn't received by President Trump. He did not act on it, and he was still trying to play nice. He may have never even seen it. We don't know. But that letter, the original copy of the open letter in 2017, January 20th, it was on Inauguration Day, was circulated very, very widely. It went viral. It was translated into some languages I didn't even recognize. And it was clear that people all over the world expected us to do something about our government, to rein in our government. And that's what I think we need to make the focus of our talk today, really is, it's easy to talk about the shortcomings of the clergy or whatever, but this is a little bit more difficult of a subject to take on. And when I also approached Michael Matt, who was one of the people who signed the original letter that had appeared in the Remnant, and he agreed that maybe it would be best to present this revised letter, this second edition, in your media and to gather the signatures and so forth. It would probably be more effective to go about it that way. So to take on the U.S. government in what appears to be some bullying of the Catholic Church. I mean, that's honestly what it looks like. That's a conclusion I reached a long time ago. And that was what drew me to, along with Liz and Michael, to draft that original letter. We had some very specific things that we were looking at. I could go through the list if you want. It's going to be in the updated letter, links to it, I guess. But to what end was the National Security Agency monitoring the conclave that elected Pope Francis? Now, they're of course going to deny it. They do deny that they were monitoring it, but we have to remember. I mean, these intelligence officials. I mean, we heard from 51 of them not too long ago that right. Laptop that some crackhead left at a computer shop was Russian disinformation. And that, of course, it was a lie. And here's the thing. If they're going to lie to try to skew a U.S. election, do we really think they would have any respect for the election of a pope, for the rules of the conclave? They don't even, these people, the authoritarian left, they don't even respect our own election laws and rules. And why would they respect the rules of a conclave? In fact, they have a deep-seated contempt for the Catholic Church. So that's question number one. To what end was the National Security Agency monitoring the conclave that elected Pope Francis? Now, that information appeared in several places that had happened, that they were monitoring the conclave, and it originated in a Panorama, an Italian newspaper, I guess.
That's right. And they said that they were monitoring not only the conclave, even before Benedict resigned, according to the Panorama report.
But it went all the way back to 2005 as well. And, the information that came out was just way too specific to have just been pulled out of thin air or just speculation. And so not only we want to request any information on the eavesdropping operation that may have taken place during that 2013 conclave, requested it be made public. Hillary Clinton and John Podesta were both discussing the upcoming change in the Vatican in 6 months. And so their emails had been removed from WikiLeaks, but it was originally there in the original WikiLeaks dump. So this is another thing that we want investigated. What did they know? How did they know what they knew? We also wanted to ask the question, did the U.S. government operatives have any contact with the Cardinal Daniel's Mafia? Now, that's the St. Gallen group, and I don't like the use of the term mafia because I think that I hold mafias in higher regard than this group. But I think Liz can shed a little bit of light on that. The reason we're asking that question is because apparently, well, you go on with what you were saying about Cardinal McCarrick. He's one of the members of the St. Gallen group, Liz.
Yes, he is. And Cardinal Daniel's actually one of the members of the St. Gallen group, called themselves a mafia. I mean, he was very proud that they had been meeting over the years to replace John Paul II with a more modern pope. They claimed that they broke up after the election of Ratzinger, but they met in St. Gallen, Switzerland on a yearly basis. There is indication certainly that McCarrick was there. There is indication that Bergoglio had been discussed at these meetings. So the fact that they were meeting on a regular basis to push the church forward into a much more modernist regime. In fact, one of the leaders of the St. Gallen Mafia was Cardinal Martini of Milan, the Jesuit, who, although brilliant, was quite radically liberal. And he was actually initially anointed to be the replacement for John Paul II. But because he became ill, the second choice became Jorge Bergoglio. So they were kind of proud about the fact that they had organized and were hell-bent on replacing the church, the leader of the church, with someone that was more attuned to the liberal politics, more friendly to abortion, more friendly to gay, homosexual priests, more friendly to climate change issues, all the modernist issues that we have now been dealing with. In another issue was that it was becoming apparent that Joe Biden was very close to Ted McCarrick, that Ted McCarrick had been involved in many secret negotiations on behalf of Obama and Biden, and that Vice President Biden in June of 2011 had made a secret trip to the Vatican to see Ratzinger, Pope Benedict. That was not on anybody's schedule, and how the Italian media found out about it is somebody actually saw Biden going in to the Vatican. So there were initially a lot of kind of red flags out there that needed, we felt, a deep dive. And so that was the nature of the letter.
I just want to stress the severity of this, because finding that there was, in fact, pressure and perhaps severe pressure put on Pope Benedict to resign would invalidate his resignation. I want to give the reference just so people know how actually real this is. This is Canon 188 of the Code of Canon Law, which states a resignation made out of grave fear that is unjustly inflicted, fraud, substantial error, or simony is invalid by the law itself. So if this were found to be the case, that the U.S. exerted this kind of pressure and it was severe, you would have an undoing of the Benedict resignation, which means it was only a couple of years ago that we lost the Pope. And the man in the seat right now is not the Pope at all. It has massive ramifications for the church, I would argue for the good of the church. But nonetheless, what we're talking about is extremely, extremely serious. We just got to take a quick break and we'll be right back. For U.S. residents, creating a will has never been easier. Thanks to My Legacy Will, an online platform free of charge, you can now create your own will and choose to include LifeSite News in it, specify where your funeral will take place, the number of masses to be offered for your soul, and how your estate will be distributed. We would be deeply grateful if you remembered LifeSite News in your will. Visit mylegacywill.com/LifeSite News. Thank you for your support, and may God bless you. So I wanted to ask you, David, just beyond the monitoring that Panorama reported that was going on, you in fact saw such monitoring happening way before when you were in. Give us some timelines on that, but also what kind of pressure was exerted by the U.S. in terms of achieving regime change?
Okay, and I'll do that, but I do want to return to what you just brought up about the application of pressure to a pope to force a resignation. There's that, but then there's also a document that Pope John Paul II issued called Universi Dominici Gregis. I'm sure you're aware of this one, but this one laid out the rules for a conclave very, very clearly, and it's almost as if Pope John Paul II had some concern about the upcoming conclave. Now, the year of this, 1996, but he was already seriously concerned about secrecy and eavesdropping. And this document, anybody can pull it up and read it. It's Universi Dominici Gregis. He mentions the word secrecy 17 times. It mentions recording and audio recording and video recording equipment and recording equipment multiple times. Multiple paragraphs refer to the need for careful and stringent checks to be made with the help of trustworthy individuals of proven technical ability in order to assure that no audiovisual equipment has been secretly installed. Multiple times that's mentioned at all levels. And then in the final paragraph, paragraph 76, should the election take place in a way other than that prescribed in the present Constitution, or should the conditions laid out here not be observed, the election is for this very reason null and void, and it confers no right on the one elected. And so even the presence of eavesdropping material, hardware, within the conclave would apparently, my reading of this would invalidate it. Now, back to that article from the Panorama, apparently, once it was widely reported that this was going on, I have here Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi has played down the claim, saying, we don't know anything about this. In any case, we don't have any concerns about it. Now, we know that NSA is going to deny it, but to hear that from the Vatican spokesman is very concerning, because it would have been more, appropriate of him to say something about this is very, very serious, like you just said. If there are rumors that perhaps there was some monitoring going on, it's very, very serious. Why didn't he point that out? Why he just says, oh, no, we're not concerned about it. We don't care either way, whatever. That's not quite right. Now, back to some things that I was seeing in advance. The last 3 years that I was in the Army, I was working at the NATO headquarters in Brussels. I was, an advisor to the U.S. representative to NATO, military representative, but also the head IT guy. And I was reading the cable traffic that came across, and it included State Department cable traffic. And as I was telling Liz about this, is very strange. All of a sudden, going from just reading operational types of messages having to do with upcoming deployments and readiness levels of units and changes in the PC standards or whatever, I have this message traffic having to do with the State Department issues, relations with foreign countries, relations with the Vatican even. And then from time to time, there were church-related things involved in the cable traffic. And they always put it under the classification of confidential, at least, so that, I couldn't just take a copy of it and go bring it back to the States and distribute it or whatever. I could never copy it and pass it along to people without getting into trouble. But it was very clear that within our State Department, there were people who disagreed vehemently with the teachings of the church, that were pushing for a modernization. They saw Cardinal Ratzinger, our future Pope, and even Pope John Paul II is very backwards and stuck in the past, and the word medieval was thrown around sometimes. And I would like to appeal publicly to Secretary of State Rubio to go back. Let me do it. I'll be glad to go back through this stuff. Just declassify it. Let's do a Freedom of Information Act type of a release of some of this stuff so that American Catholics can see what the government officials at the highest levels of the State Department thought of us. Now, that was the Clinton State Department, but I'm sure, a lot of those people are professional. They're there for years and years. To me, it was a bit shocking. I went down the hall. There was a friend. I had a friend who was, I knew to be a good Catholic, and I showed it to him. I said, pull this up. Take a look at that. What do you think of that? And he read it, and he just said something about, those are just a bunch of State Department weenies, was I think the word he used. But, to me, I couldn't consider it so lightly as that, just to say, oh, those are just State Department people, because these are people who are interacting with people who form our foreign policy. And so after that very disturbing series of revelations, like I said, I left the Army in 2001. I got as far away from Washington, D.C. as I could. And it wasn't until 2013 when I heard that Pope Benedict had resigned that I started thinking, this just doesn't look right. I mean, I knew they didn't like him. I knew that there were people placed very high in our government who didn't like him. And I think that's what we need to make the focus of our concern these days is what is the government doing with our church? They have no business monitoring our conclaves. They have no business even concerning themselves with what our church teaches. They can mind their own business. And that's what we need to push for. We need to push for accountability for people in our government who have been involved in any such thing. And then we also need to make it very, very clear that we're not putting up with any of this. And Liz made a great point. People all over the world are counting on us to do this. That first open letter went all over the world. People all over the world were so excited that maybe a group of American Catholics were going to finally bring some accountability to our government, and it went nowhere. And we can't entirely blame Donald Trump for that. Again, he was trying to play the nice guy. But there's a different man in the White House now, and he's been threatened. And so he's ready to investigate, and so are we. So we're going to revive it now.
He recognizes the deep state, and hopefully through the words of the Archbishop he knows very well, Archbishop Vigano, he recognizes the relationship between the deep church and the deep state. Now, it's interesting. Over on Bannon's show, Liz, you said something very apropos. And to your point, David, I just want to play devil's advocate for a second, because the government of the Clintons, of the Obama-Biden government, and then the Biden government, were all the same in that they were globalists, they were elitists, and they have a very set agenda, which is the opposite of that of the Catholic Church. In fact, I think you put it, Liz, that Ratzinger stood in the way of the whole globalist agenda on all of those very points where they are most concerned. When you have the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, denied Holy Communion by her bishop, and then the Pope comes to her rescue, has her receiving Holy Communion in papal mass. The same day, he releases a letter saying that the only thing needed to receive Holy Communion is faith, and publicly criticizes that very archbishop who denied her Holy Communion 3 times in public. That's when you know you've got a tool in the chair of Peter, rather than his predecessors who are all about denying Holy Communion to pro-abortion politicians. And you have that on abortion, on euthanasia, on same-sex marriage, on the transgender issue, on immigration, illegal immigration. It's basically like all the 7 sacraments of the left are being held back by Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, and that had to be done away with.
Similarly, the knife in the back to Ratzinger was when Nancy Pelosi, I think it was in 2008 or so, went to the Vatican, insisted on meeting Pope Benedict. And after the meeting, although he usually only met with heads of state, and after the meeting, she came on and said, we had a lovely discussion about the poor and about how wonderful the church is. And uncharacteristically of Ratzinger in diplomacy, he issued a huge, loud, actually very, very powerful statement saying that he disagrees with Pelosi about her position on abortion, that he told her so, that abortion is the preeminent evil in the church, and that politicians who are Catholics should be denied communion if they promote pro-abortion policies. And it was a total throwdown on Nancy Pelosi that was public and vociferous, and they had nothing could say. Now, I too have read additional cable traffic that was released under WikiLeaks with Julian Assange. And these cable and diplomacy statements were coming through after Pope Benedict became Pope, and they were monitoring his statements, his edicts, who he was meeting with. And it was very clear, like David said, it was very clear that the State Department political hacks from the embassy in the Vatican were not pleased with the strong positions that Benedict was taking on the issues of the global reset, of the globalists, of the New World Order. He immediately was backtracking and realizing that the climate change hoax had become devoid of any scientific backing, and was demanding that if we're going to talk about climate change, we need to bring the science into the issue. Secondly, he talked about, and he wrote, as we all will recall, to the U.S. bishops saying, do not give communion to pro-abort Catholic politicians. Now, we know what happened to that letter. That letter was deep-sixed by none other than Theodore McCarrick and never reached maximum exposure. Also, what I find interesting in reading these cables, and which to me was a huge red flag, was that Benedict ceased all negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party with respect to the appointment of bishops. And he did this, and it's in the cable from the U.S. Embassy to the State Department, saying that Benedict no longer trusted the CCP to keep their end of the bargain. And so what happened when Bergoglio was immediately installed? Within a few months, he sent none other than McCarrick to China to restart the negotiations over the appointment of bishops and how they are negotiated. Now we have a CCP cardinal. Now we have bishops appointed by the CCP.
And should add actually that Francis did that after being warned by Vigano that McCarrick was an abuser. Yes, unreal.
That's correct. All the hot button issues that were the darling issues of the New World Order, in addition to, we know that Benedict took the name Benedict after Saint Benedict to re-Christianize Europe. That was his goal as Pope. And what happened is that he started writing and talking to the EU and to prime ministers that he wanted God and the Christian faith to become the center of Europe and to re-Christianize Europe. Now, this was in direct contravention to the planned 2015 Muslim migration into Europe that we now are seeing the results of huge surge in violence and disruption of society. So there are all these issues. And finally, the State Department and the American government knew that they would find nobody smarter than Ratzinger to articulate both historically, theologically, politically, and under natural law, these important issues and arguments. He was a huge obstacle to the rolling out of the global reset and the New World Order. So it became very clear that he had to be removed, because what the New World Order didn't have and was looking for is a moral voice to support its efforts. So they had to get rid of Benedict and replace him with somebody that they would trust and would carry out their agenda, so that they would have the backing of the Vatican, the vicar of Christ, to support their immoral agenda in the vaccine, in climate change, in the Paris Treaty, in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, all pro-abortion, disastrous to civilization, in undermining the Catholic teaching.
David, in your experience, from having been on the inside track of this, what tactics does the U.S. use to achieve regime change? And how could that then apply to the Vatican, Pope Benedict?
So one of the things that we ask about, though, that is an excellent question. So one of the things that we ask about in that 2017 letter, and we reiterate this, international money transactions with the Vatican were suspended during the last few days prior to the resignation of Pope Benedict. Suspended. Why were any U.S. government agencies involved in this? And the next question is, why were international money transactions resumed on February 12, 2013, the day after Benedict XVI announced his resignation? Was this a pure coincidence? So a technique to force a resignation would be something as simple as that. Just shut off no SWIFT transactions for the Vatican until this Pope agrees to step down. That is something that actually happened. They couldn't make their payroll. You couldn't draw money to the ATMs. Nothing could go on in the Vatican regarding money until the day after Pope Benedict announced his resignation. Now, I'm sorry, that's just not coincidence.
Pope Pius XI said, men must look for the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. And he urged that the faithful give public honor to Christ the King so that individuals and states would submit once more to the rule of their Savior. And that is why LifeSite News is raising up the image of Christ the King across the United States. And you can help us reach millions more. Please pledge your support today for these billboards at lifefunder.com/Christ is King. There were some other pressure points that people have speculated on. It was a central focus at the beginning. During the resignation time, there was a lot of theories buzzing around, one of which was the SWIFT banking fiasco, because nobody could understand that. There were other thoughts about his brother, Georg, being involved with some choir that had sexual abuse allegations, and that he could be tied to that or pressured that way. Liz, some other thoughts there?
Yeah, my hunch is that this was a full-scale operation, probably led by the United States government, but many other countries who were favorable to the globalist agenda chimed in to do their part. There was the Dalmatson scandal, where his brother, Pope Benedict's brother, beloved brother, who frankly he talked to every day on the phone. So if the NSA was listening to conversations between the two brothers on a regular basis, as many have said, then they would have known that there was a scandal breaking out in Germany, where his brother was the choir director in a school where many boys were disclosing that they had been sexually abused. That allegation was not made against his brother. However, there was allegations of physical abuse on the young boys, the choir boys. Interesting enough, and in reading the media tea leaves, all of a sudden, that story just died on the vines, and which made me wonder whether they were just using that as one of many pressure points. No, he loved nobody more than he loved his brother, who is, a beloved priest in Germany. They both became ordained priests at the same time. So they were using every single resource they could, in my opinion, based on the overwhelming evidence that he needed to be pressured into stepping down. No, interestingly, the theological arguments, the language he used in his resignation, there's been great work done by Ann Barnhart and Ed Mazza with respect to whether or not he actually resigned. But I think what we're talking about are kind of the political machinations that were involved.
Some of the other pressures at the time, if we recall, that was the time also the Vatican scandal, where his butler was involved in stealing papers from him right off Benedict's desk. So that was all going on. And then there was, which seems to be a regular occurrence, the sort of the Vatican bank scandals at the same time. So there were a lot of pressures at the time. But if we think about this, you also have internal pressures from the heretic cardinals and bishops around him. And to me, that's the worst. So you have all this external pressure that governments might have. Let's say there's a foreign power looking to do regime change. They're going to get financial pressure, all these sort of things happening to them externally. But then internally, they're also going to have pressure from their own citizens, from their own, up and coming leaders who want to take over and so on. And you had that in the church as well. You have massive globalists on the inside of the church, which Archbishop Vigano refers to as the deep church. And we can name them because we know who the players are, McCarrick being probably numero uno. But you have this whole cadre of them right now. All of them are installed, especially if we look to the United States. You have the triumvirate of cardinals when you have Tobin, McElroy, and Supich. Talk about the globalists being on the inside, those who want a different church, who sort of have it at this point in terms of where this papacy has gone on all of those issues that are so near and dear to the hearts of globalists. It's an incredible thing.
That's a great point because, as you'll recall, we learned that Cardinal Martini, who was a friend, although a radical liberal, a friend of Benedict, visited him in the summer of 2012. And I think according to Gashwine, I think actually it is Martini, he told Benedict, now's the time to resign. You should resign. You've lost control of the curia. You've lost control of the church. So to your point, John Henry, the internal pressure was building on this, frail, kind gentleman of a pope. And so I think, all those factors. And then, of course, the coup de grace was, we'll turn off the bank. We'll just, in the midst of, a lot of tourism. And so that was kind of, I think, the final message.
Liz, do you have a theory on what the purpose of that meeting was between Pope Benedict and Joe Biden, Vice President Biden? I mean, you were the one that wanted to insert that item into the open letter in 2017. Do you have some thoughts on what was going on there?
My legal experience always, when there are secret agreements or secret meetings, then there are nefarious things that are going on. We know that with all the secret agreements that McCarrick was involved in. We still don't know about the secret agreement with the Chinese government in the Vatican. The fact that it was not on either of their calendars, was there a message brought? I mean, these are questions we need to know. In which documents, both at the National Archives and Records Administration, and Doge and the White House should have those records. What was the purpose? What was the readout after the meeting? What happened? Did Joe Biden say, it's time, for your sake, for the sake of the church, it's time to step down? It's merely speculation, but the secretive, clandestine nature of it is very curious to me.
The date you have on that is June 3rd, 2011. In advance, significantly in advance, but do you think it's possible the purpose of that meeting then was, okay, it's time for you to step down?
Well, and let's not forget, one of the closest people to Joe Biden was Theodore McCarrick. And Theodore McCarrick was the global roving ambassador for the Obama administration and for Pope Francis, as well as being a global sexual predator. So, McCarrick would have been able to pull the strings, orchestrate whatever. I thought that was very strange. And we know that there was this constant building of pressure. And then in comes Joe Biden. I want to see a readout of that meeting. And the American Catholics and the global Catholics have a right to know whether the American government was involved in pressuring Benedict to step down. Was there a threat? We know that Joe Biden wasn't shy about threatening the president of the Ukraine publicly and told about how he was going to cut off aid to if they didn't fire the prosecutor who was investigating his son. So, all who knows? I mean, but it's critical to ask these questions. We deserve answers.
So one way that we can possibly get to the bottom of some of this would be to give whatever kind of diplomatic immunity or immunity of whatever is necessary to Julian Assange and Edward Snowden to be able to appear before Congress and answer some questions about what they know. Both of those two individuals are mentioned in that article that's the third link in the letter. Okay, that particular article from the Catholic Register. I think it mentions WikiLeaks, but also Edward Snowden. Some of what he has revealed has confirmed some of this. And so we believe, and I think we should insist as Catholics that those two individuals should be given whatever kind of immunity is necessary for them to appear before Congress and answer questions. The second thing I wanted to talk about was regarding this strange relationship between the U.S. government and the Catholic Church is what in the world is this thing about the FBI wanting to investigate Catholics attending the traditional Mass? I think that we need to get to the bottom of that. Hopefully, God willing, before too long, Kash Patel will be the director of FBI. Maybe by the time this is released, we need to know what is the extent of that operation. I happen to be convinced it's been going on for a long time, and it was apparently not confined to the Richmond office either. It was much broader in scope than that, and so we need to know. We have a right to know as Catholics. Okay, why was this operation carried out? And we also need to know the names and see the photos of the individuals involved. If there were agents who actually were, quite frankly, dumb enough to agree to participate in this instead of going to their boss and saying, no, that's inappropriate, I'm not doing that. That would have been the right way to handle this. You're working for the FBI and they tell you, okay, go, sit in and listen on what's going on with this Latin Mass over here. And the appropriate response is no. That's no. That's not, a group of people who are getting together to practice their faith the way that Catholics have for the past 1,500 years. That is not a threat to anybody. That is a threat to nobody. And so we need to know the names of the individuals involved, whatever agents were involved. We need to see their pictures so that, and this is not for retribution. This is for charitable reasons. This is because why? Because now we can pray for those individuals who are fake Christians, who have pretended to be Christians. We can maybe they received Holy Communion sacrilegiously. Okay, these people are in need of our prayers, and so we want to know who they are. But they also need to be fired, and so do whoever was involved in this operation needs to be fired. And it just needs to be done with such a finality that there is never any thought of doing such a thing ever again.
David, Liz, final thoughts as we wrap up here. I want to encourage people to go to lifepetitions.com, sign on to this letter yourself. This is to encourage President Trump to release these records through his administration. We're going to get this delivered to the president. I'm hoping that our good friend, Father Altman, will be able to take that message to him directly. But this really needs to happen. And this time, with a president who's much more aware of the deep state and the deep church, and that these are warring factions, and that this is not some, let's be conservative, I'm sure they'll work with us. No, they're enemies, and he now knows that. So God willing, we have this clarity, and boy, would it be a boon for the church today. It would just be incredible. David, your final thoughts.
I just want to thank you for giving this effort your attention and your support, and I want to encourage people to, try not to focus so much on the shortcomings of our clergy. Yeah, that's out there. But let's try to focus on what has our government been up to. Catholics all over the world are expecting us to rein in our government. Let's get control of it. We have an opportunity now. So sign on to this effort.
Amen to that. Liz, take us away.
I'd say, why is this letter to Trump so important? The deep state and deep church cabal is already attacking the Trump administration's deportation policy. It is deep state and deep church cabal has remained woefully silent over the Catholic Joe Biden's abortion policy. The deep state and deep church cabal has already attacked J.D. Vance, our vice president and Catholic convert, Tom Homan, our czar at the border and Catholic, about building a wall to protect our country. This has been only the first few weeks of this administration. They're not backing off since the moment they pressured Benedict to step down. The last dying gasp of the global elites is that they are relying heavily on the Francis Church to undermine the MAGA movement, the populist movement around the world, which are desperately trying to raise up Jesus Christ as our King and Savior. This is why this letter is so important and must be addressed and acted on forthwith.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, David, Liz, for joining us. God bless you. And may this letter not only reach President Trump, but may he act on it. And please, my friends, keep that in your prayers. And God bless all of you, and we'll see you next time.
Aloha, everyone. This is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.